Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Logos Poetry Collective for this very special Sunday gathering featuring Fiona Sze-Lorrain and Dan Beachy Quick. We're elated that you've taken some time of your Sabbath morning to be here with us as we digitally evoke transcendence through poetry, ritual, and conversation together. To begin, I'd love to give you just a sense of how Logos came into being. A few years back in 2018, I was having a coffee with a good friend and poet based here in Austin, Texas, and we were discussing how transactional and passive and frustrating that some poetry readings can tend to be. We described the experience of either sitting in the audience and passively absorbing poetry or being a reader at a lectern, almost discharging it on other people. And we started to wonder what it might look like to incorporate elements of sacred liturgy and ritual into the format of a reading to create an experience that was dynamic and participatory. We reached out to some friends at Lazarus Brewing Company here in East Austin, and since 2018 have been hosting monthly gatherings using our unique liturgically-inflected format. As you can see in the chat, we have a order of service that you can download via Google Drive, and we'll be dropping that link into the Facebook Live feed as well. So as we begin our reading, I'd like to give you just a sense of how this format will unfold. Following this word of welcome, we'll begin with the responsive reading of our opening text, which will be presented here on the screen in front of you. If you're on our Zoom call, we invite you to keep your microphone muted since Zoom doesn't do a good job of picking up from multiple audio sources, but we still invite you to read the bolded lines aloud into the space around you to add your voice to that of the collective. We'll then have some poems from our first poet, Dan Beachy Quick, the final poem of which will be presented here on the screen before you so you can absorb it visually as well as orally. We will then have a series of poems presented by Fiona Sze-Lorrain, and following that, we'll have a bit of curated conversation with our poets. We'll then give you a sense of what's coming up with Logos and give you different opportunities to connect with our poets and to access their wonderful work before we close with our concluding text as a benediction, which is Psalm by George Oppen. And we'll share that as responsive reading as well. Friends, we so wish that we were gathering in person with you at Lazarus Brewing Company beneath our beloved bistro lights with a festal table of guacamole and queso and other wonderful Lazarus fare arrayed before us. But wherever you are, we're grateful that you've gathered us. We hope that you and your families and loved ones are safe and healthy, and that you're experiencing as much buoyancy as possible in the midst of this year's heaviness. We'll hope you'll find a little bit of light and lift during our time together today, and we are truly blessed by your presence. So now I'll ring a meditation bell, and I'll invite you just to take a moment to ground and center yourself into the space, to perhaps let go of whatever stresses or strains you might be bringing into the event this morning, and to prepare your hearts and your minds as we gather to read this opening text, Mark Strand's The Mailman, together.
The Mailman by Mark Strand. It is midnight.
He comes up the walk and knocks at the door.
I rush to greet him.
He stands there weeping, shaking a letter at me.
He tells me it contains terrible personal news.
He falls to his knees.
Forgive me, he pleads.
I ask him inside.
He wipes his eyes.
His dark blue suit is like an ink stain on my crimson couch.
Helpless, nervous, small, He curls up like a ball.
And sleeps while I compose more letters to myself in the same vein.
You shall live by inflicting pain.
You shall forgive.
Thank you, Dan and Fiona, for leading us in that beautiful reading. Grace is when what needs not fall comes falling. So gently of itself the snow, so gently of itself the fog, blocking at night the stars. This stanza from a poem titled A Century of Meditation, one of the numerous nimbly numinous reflections comprising Dan Beachy Quick's most recent collection of poetry, Arrows, images grace as a kind of falling. In Spiritual Laws, from his essays first series, Ralph Waldo Emerson urged, let us draw a lesson from nature. When the fruit is ripe, it falls. When the fruit is dispatched, the leaf falls. The circuit of the waters is mere falling. The walking of man and all animals is a falling forward. To figure grace as a kind of falling is not only to align Beachy Quick, a profoundly philosophical poet, with the founder of Transcendentalism, it is also a way of describing how his quicksilver lyric logic works. In Beachy Quick's deft and darting, searingly sinuous lines, knowledge emerges, resigns, manifests, resists, is got at, and ultimately accumulates like a kind of falling. And the bounty one receives as an attentive reader is very great indeed. Dan Beachy Quick is the author of 8 collections of poems, including the aforementioned Arrows, published this year by Tupelo Press, a novel, 6 chapbooks, 2 in collaboration with Srikant Reddy, and other projects including Stone Garland, a book translation of poems by 6 poets in the Greek lyric tradition, also out this year from Milkweed Editions. His 2019 collection, Variations on Dawn and Dusk, was longlisted for the 2019 National Book Award. His poems have appeared widely in literary journals, including The New Republic, Poetry, Paris Review, and many others, and his essays and reviews in the New York Times, the Southern Review, and other venues. The recipient of fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the Woodbury Poetry Room at Harvard University, Beachy Quick has received the Colorado Book Award and been a finalist for the William Carlos Williams Prize and the PEN USA Literary Award in Poetry. He is the recipient of a Lannan Foundation residency and is taught at the Iowa Writers Workshop. He is a University Distinguished Teaching Scholar at Colorado State University, where he serves as Assistant Chair of the English Department and teaches in the MFA program in Creative Writing. Beachy Quick's aforementioned stanza concludes, a voice speaks at night above where it lives, leaning out the window, wondering at the moon, how close it is, how near at hand. I don't make a sound. Scared, I'll scare the voice from falling down. Emerson's paragraph continues, all our manual labor and works of strength, as prying, splitting, digging, rowing, and so forth, are done by dint of continual falling. And the globe, earth, moon, comet, sun, star fall forever and ever. Beachy Quick has learned Emerson's hard-eyed wisdom, his inspired industry, the work of his pen's falling, and acts through itself trust a kind of grace, and how immensely fortunate we are to receive that grace today as we welcome to Logos Dan Beachy Quick.
Thank you, Travis, so much for an incredibly generous introduction and even more, such a genuine reading of what the poems most want to be. That's a gift, and thank you. And thank you everyone for showing up on a Sunday, whatever time it is. And I thought I'd read just kind of back and forth between Arrows and Stone Garland, the book of translations. And because Fiona is a wonderful translator too, I thought I might read poems that are kind of uniquely tied either to the studying of Greek that I took up during the composition of Arrows, and how that opened towards certain ideas or cares that felt like I couldn't address them without writing a poem in some way, and other aspects of translation, especially a number of poems thinking about Paul Celan, the great poet who himself was a translator. So I'll just read for a while and hope I remember to say things that help explain some of the poems. I'll begin with one that, for those of you who know the work of Paul Celan, you'll recognize some of his language and concerns. And the second section of Arrows are all really tied to the experience and the kind of thinking that learning the ancient Greek has opened for me. And one of those, is something that I think maybe deep in my heart I always knew, but came to in some ways late in an actual realization of. And it goes to the word for poet in Greek, poetes, which means maker. And the verb related, poiein, would be just as you think, to make or to do. But Greek has this voice called the middle voice, where the verb performs its action against itself in a way, this kind of radical, indolent passivity, as Keats might put it. And certain verbs change their meaning in the middle voice. And poiein is one of those, where in the middle voice, poiesthai, it means not to make, but to consider. And I became very concerned, and still am, with the idea that the poem is the thing that must be made before it can be thought, and there is no other way. So the made thing considers itself. Made the night, made the day, made deep the waters go away. Made the crow and the threshing sound, made the earth and the shovel. Made the dove and the olive sprig, made holes in the ground fill up with time, made peace a spring of trouble, made the rock, the bone, the mud, the cloud, the bee loud glade, made the prayer sound of water wearing rock away. Made the spark, made the flint, made the dry grass brittle, made the crystal, made the plug, made memory on the touch screen glow, made Aleph silent, made fear live at home. Made the crosswinds carry smoke from open window out open door, made the circuit, made the fire a button turns on. Made the flood, made the drawer, made the deer on plastic legs in the overgrown lawn, made paradise, made tears, made the child yawn. Oh, you, oh, none, oh, no one, oh, you. Oh, fault, oh, vault, oh, stars, oh, zero, oh, rift, oh, bright sea, oh, cliff. There is a height, there is a depth, there is the level ground. There is silence there where some hear only sound. There is ash and ashen hair. There is an alphabet whose last letter wanders in the dust, seeking something that can't be found. There is wisdom and hunger and days, blank pages in books, music, and strange animals asleep in beds of their own making. All night, these animals dream of themselves in this world of no proof, only evidence. This poem picks up on the myth of Actaeon and thinks about the names of his hounds that he went hunting with and who ended up hunting him. Hunt and hearth. Name them staghorn and fetlock. Name the dog's green eyes in the torchlight bed of bent grass and gazelle, and the wounded leap highest and hidden spring. Name them whitetail and doe ear and blood dappled throat and sunlit ruby pulse in the ear and marrow. Name the dog's tendon taut as arrow string strung. Name them bone, all of them bone. Call the heart rabbit in its hole, rabbit that sleeps curled up in its ears. Call it deaf to blood's mad rush. Call it senseless when mind spins muscles into fear and fear digs a little deeper the hole that is its home. Call the heart a rabbit hiding in its hole. String of the lyre and the arrow string both fling out the thought they sing, and make a wound they call a heart whose life is pierced when it begins. It begins to feel when it begins to bleed. String of the lyre and the arrow string. Deep in the woods where the hounds lope on the deer path when they lap up the distance, sped on by names called out behind them, sprung out from the taut string of their names. Fate plays the same trick again, naming some after what they become, naming some what they hunt. He of the pierced ankle named swollen foot, he of staghorns grown out his head. So scarlet the arrowhead is before it's strung, so red the tooth before the bite. Name meat, meat, and muscle, muscle. This smoke on the altar is smoke on the altar that some pleasure in the clouds inhales. Name a hunger after what it hunts when it hunts some end to desire, or name it nothing, nothing better than a home built around a fire, nothing better than a hut. And I'm going to read a poem supposedly by Anacreon, but most likely by a poet writing in the name of Anacreon. One or many did so in a book of apocryphal poems named the Anacreonata. But I decided to fuse them together to fulfill the derivative poet's wish, feeling something of a derivative poet myself. Field song. We call you blessed, cicada, when from the high bent branch arch of trees you have drunk your pure little dew. How like a king, like an arrow string you sing. You are one who is all things. In the far fields you are as all you see. Great as the woods that bear the nut-bearing trees. You are, dear friend of ground-tilling men, never hindering, never damaging the crop. Those who cannot not die hold you in honor as summer's sweet prophet. The muses love you, kiss you, and gave you the clear-voiced plow path of your song. Old age does not wear you away, wise one, earth-born song lover. With no suffering, without spilling blood, you are so near, so like the gods. I'm going to read 3 from a 9-poem series, each titled Drone. And there's a weave of 3 different approaches. The drone that is the bee that goes out to the fields to collect the nectar and the pollen. Drone that is the undergirding white noise against which melody and prayer might be heard. And drone that are remote control weapons. And the third are erasures pulled from New York Times and Washington Post articles in 2016. Drone. Once I lived in quiet, all kinds of song. I once lived in quiet, all of each one of me lived. Oh worm, oh mind, oh yes, worm you. You wind silk around the hunger thoughts, patient bind and bide, bide and bind. What sun defines, this song denies, this error in the circuit that grinds as it guides. O rut, O halo, O spiral of time, be calm, be quiet, as the lost do, doubt it, even as it sings, O song. Drone. What honey-heavy portable heaven requires law to wander, law to swarm, to keep beneath the thousands thick hum the queen cloaked in royal scent warm. Any hollow can be a home, as when a fact feeling suddenly weightless leaves in the mind a little room where the bliss-busy drone might cease to roam. Exclude this thought from the hive's whole stress. Usefulness dies when command closes heaven's wax vault and love's honey loan. Drone. A first drone rules the troubled known. It will be uncomfortable work. Stop and express rain in every day. Stop the drone ignoring the drone. Drone is the vast outsaid, drone of describing as just, ever more transparent sight, stricter rules. From Theognis. Never hold a man back against his will to remain among us. Never kick him out the door to the streets when he doesn't want to go. Never rouse from rest, Simonides, any of us who, drunk on wine, gentle sleep embraces. Never send a wakeful man to bed when he doesn't want to go. All force kills joy. For the man wanting to drink, let the pourer of wine stand beside him, but not every night can be so delicate. And I've drunk all I can drink of honey-sweet wine, and going home, I'll remember the pains sleep loosens, undresses, puts to bed. From Alckmin. They are sleeping, mountain heads, headlands, and the gullies too. The fallen leaves and the tribe of slow-footed creatures, the dark earth grows. Beasts of prey, mountain bred, and brood of wild bees, and the brute monsters deep in the deep purple seas. And that flock of omen-giving birds long-winged, they are sleeping too. And I'm going to finish with a poem tied to Salon and tied to translation in a profoundly troubling kind of way, honestly. A poem titled Sibboleth, which comes from the word shibboleth, a Hebrew word whose meaning is manifold. It means a river. It also means a seed and the husk of the seed as an ear of wheat or a corn still with its tassel and silk. And shibboleth was the word that was a password for the Hebraic army in a war against the Ephraimites. And they were trying to escape across a river and they couldn't tell foe from friend. And the Hebrew army would ask everyone to say this word shibboleth, and the tongue of the enemy they were fighting couldn't pronounce the sh, would pronounce it sibboleth. And anyone who made that mistake in translation and pronunciation would then be killed. This poem is titled with the wrong pronunciation, Sibboleth. Each of us has repeatedly our own shibboleth, husk tight against the ear, against the grain. Exactly because no one's eyes are wide as the world, we must each say to ourselves the word and ask if we belong. To the river, do we belong? To the olive on the twig, do we? How often at night the mouth works its own words by itself for no one's hearing, not even our own. Grain sleep of dreams in which snow again buries the river and fields. And also the strange, slow green beneath ice or in eyes, an and that acts like an or. And those who in daylight say, no, passerón, at night let us enter the Holy Land, the secret, the cipher that says, I am. Poor river flowing endlessly into itself, poor heart. Babel's bricks break down in the blood, and that Eden tree has a leaf still called a lung. I carried the pebble of it all in my thought. I came all this way to sing one song.
And thank you so very much for that beautiful reading. Having unmuted myself, I can give you a proper applause on behalf of all of those here gathered on the Zoom call. And we'll give folks an invitation to pick up their own copy of Arrows and also Stone Garland later. But I just want to say this is such a beautiful book inside and out. I loved hearing you give breath to some of those poems, having spent time with them on the page, but it's also just such a joy to hold in the hand. So I hope folks will have a chance to really immerse themselves in this beautiful new collection soon. And we'll have a chance to engage in a little conversation with you about these poems and your whole body of work in just a minute. And before that, it's my honor to introduce our second reader, Fiona Sze-Lorrain. And Fiona, I have to apologize. I took 3 years of French in high school, and my dumb Texan tongue just doesn't want to pronounce your name, I don't think, with the musical beauty that it ought. So I apologize if I've mispronounced your surname at all. But let me, that having been said, let me introduce our second reader. How does one define spirit without blood to make the body known across a shore so point blank that we see its passing tail? So muses Fiona Sze-Lorrain in the opening lines of Eternity, the culminating poem of her newest collection, Reign in Plural, released this year from Princeton University Press. Like the multifaceted, misting and mystic image of the titles of the collection's title, the poems proffered in these pages coax the reader into contemplation of the physical and the verbal, the aesthetic or synesthetic, and the oblique perspectivizing domestic, until differences between either allied. Questions and replies arrive and vanish like sudden storm or smoke. Reading Sze-Lorrain, I'm reminded of the title of a book by theologian Tony Baker, who describes the search for God, for truth, as, quote, a diagonal advance. Reading these poems, one feels leavened by the varieties of paradox, buoyed in a music that is as lush and full as it is limpid and spare. Fiona Sze-Lorrain is a poet, literary translator, editor, and zheng harpist who writes and translates in English, French, Chinese, and occasionally Spanish. She is the author of 4 books of poetry: Water the Moon, My Funeral Gondola, The Ruined Elegance, which was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and one of Library Journal's best poetry books, and most recently, the aforementioned Reign in Plural. She has translated several volumes of contemporary Chinese language, French, and American poets, and guest or co-edited 3 anthologies of international literature. Sze-Lorrain's work was shortlisted for the 2016 Best Translated Book Award and longlisted for the 2014 PEN Award for poetry in translation. In 2018, she was the inaugural writer in residence at Museo de Arte Latinoamericano de Buenos Aires. She serves as an editor at Vif Éditions, a small independent press based in Paris. As a zheng musician, she has performed worldwide. I don't tell a soul what you intuit on a peak, eternity concludes. I won't tell others how storms heal or stop the countdown, why echoes blink to preserve the drift. I won't paint your dream in this portrait. Sze-Lorrain's poems gesture toward what the poet has intuited and ask us to fill in the space words' absence make with our own experience and knowing. Hers is what I want to name a poetics of mindfulness. Reading these poems, one glimpses a mind watching thoughts arise and subside like images in an impressionist painting. Images drawn from immense learning and longing, deep reading and resolve, illusion and protrusion that coalesces into feeling and brightening insight. These are poems that summon what is best in us, that ask us to draw on our capacity for curiosity, inquiry, interrogation, and wonder, poems that ask us to go and meet them. We find ourselves changed by that encounter and how blessed we are to contemplate that transmutation as we welcome to Logos this Sunday morning, Fiona Sze-Lorrain.
Thank you very much. I do want to thank everybody for coming, especially as Dan said, on a Sunday morning or evening or afternoon, wherever you are. It's evening here in Paris, and it's fairly dark. I can see that everyone is sort of a Zoom professional. I'm still fairly amateur with this technology thing. Reality is that I'm very much struggling in this digital invisible world, in part because I'm one of those folks who do not own a cell phone. I've never owned a mobile phone. And I mean, I emailed, but that's quite it when it comes to technology. I'm rather stupid. And for that reason, I do feel that I'm much more vulnerable, which leads to my first poem, the poem that I'm going to read with the title, More Vulnerable Than Others. So what if I break? I will continue to eat mud, unwind underground, mask band signs, chew holes in every tall grapevine, breed my roots after a nap, spread fronds as free clothes, free money, lay branches bare for the moon and its jaws, while each flower falls to its own bad dream. I think I mentioned that at one occasion that one of my first readers immediately, told me when she read this poem that you have to take it away. It's negative. I said, I don't think it's negative. I think it's realistic. And I put it as the first poem. The next poem that I'm going to read is a poem for my grandmother, who died in 2013. A matter of time. The last time I saw this body chose me. Fiona, it called out loud at sundown, and I remember nothing of what I did. Sometimes I bent close to check if it breathed. In between scenes, 1,000 miles from the crowd. Crowded yet receding. Days when air was still clear. A little raw, a village, primary colors, the kitchen where I memorized idioms and taoqian and love poems, sesame cakes, Shanghainese dumplings to steam with Napa cabbage. a stone house gone in flames on her 60th birthday. What's left behind of the field reminds me of this body, a wounded horse which must suffer in order to live. Rubble fresh and set apart from the disaster. The body is fighting with the spirit inside it. What would the flesh say? Nothing, it says. It says nothing. Now I touch its skin, the cream of being alive. Indecorium, after 3 lives, 4 countries, in 9 decades. The past and the present against what comes next. 4 daughters to consult the book and a son abroad. Sweetly or briefly, the impressive cruelty. If soul can't talk the body, each organ divide for prayer before victory. Is there, is there. I can't invent this lack of a last word. Help me with the title, not in words or grieve or all of it opening to seek relief. Never stay politically naive. The voice returns to colonize my fury. In the end, the beginning unnecessary to avoid anguish. Grandmother, 2 women, facing exhaustion without permission to leave. The next poem, far from description. Day after day, this sentence grew longer. The verb ran faster than expected. Pushy as ever, it hurt the feelings of its own speaker. I was a speaker who couldn't agree with its mood. It wasn't grief, ecstasy, or fury I experienced when pregnant with a rebel. It was the way a regret lingered, stuck and turning in one corner, as if it couldn't perish without being heard, as if its madness drove me to silence, as if reason or the sound of it mattered. I feel a little guilty for not giving any commentary on each poem. I normally try to, but today, as you know, actually I don't know where to look. I mean, at myself or at each square and or the camera, and I always feel like smiling, but for some reason my poems do not seem to want to smile. So, and they're not supposed to be funny, although I always thought they're funny. But anyway, to suffering, to liberation. I addressed you not as twin sisters, but as 2 fruits hanging from the same branch of a tree planted by an agnostic farmer. He prayed for harvest in October, asked for a wife season after season, coveting the life of a painter who drew from scratch a still life of 2 pairs in a basket. Simple but climatic, they looked equal, yet dissimilar, recognized by him who planted that tree. Well, I sort of chose especially for today. It was about an agnostic farmer, but obviously I'm not agnostic. I always do that, when I want to say something or say something else, the opposite of it. It's fairly Buddhist. Duality, isn't it? Okay. A short poem. The illusion of tenderness. Narcissus in a raku tea bowl, one you thought you saw in a private museum, on loan from Kyoto for undisclosed reasons, floated on matcha from 1,000 dinners back, forced by gravity to let go of stillness the moment each petal floated on its tones. most dramatically, roughing out the principle of least action, listening hands down to the chorus. Look. All right, I'm going to read another short poem, something that I like very much, but as some colleagues who might be familiar with my work know or notice, I'm not being political today. And this poem is part of a series of poems called Not Meant as Poems. And this is the second one. Putin's dog can't bark. Putin's dog can't jump from a lofty height. Putin's dog can't fornicate with other bourgeois dogs on a winter stroll in a Tsaritsino's park. Putin's dog can't bag, but is groomed, spoiled, and fed with what? I've no idea. Neither does the press. Putin's dog can't fire its master or look sick. It won't suffer beating or torture, but can't sleep without having to hide. But Putin's dog, like all dogs, can thank God, pee-pee or caca, whenever it likes. All right, here's a long poem, just to dilute a little bit of the vulgarity. It's Sunday. Give up thinking twice. This is the acoustic version. Instead of Cohen, I heard another bard. Some thought him tender, some found him uphill. So what if rain must fall hard, one grumbled, cut inside each chord, but surrendered for time. Some thought him tender, some found him uphill. I listened to each repetition, an apology in the fewest words, cut inside each chord, but surrendered for time. I would have given up a mountain for the storm. I listened to each repetition, an apology in the fewest words. How long it could last, it might have sensed, when void of its heaven, it must fight its own earth. I would have given up a mountain for the storm. I credited the wind for his cri du cœur, discredited the same wind for his rhythm. How long it could last, it might have sensed, when void of its heaven, it must fight its own earth. How much delirium to be heard as a poem, he did not answer, did not bother. I credited the wind for his cri du cœur, discredited the same wind for his rhythm. To clarify music was not his task. How much delirium to be heard as a poem, he did not answer, did not bother. Some thought it ego, some said he pushed notes off the high-speed reel. To clarify music was not his task. I saw a door when he played harmonica. Some thought it ego, some said he pushed notes off the high-speed reel, green, blue, and a jar. I saw a door when he played harmonica. No one waited behind or outside. Green, blue, and a jar. Times change its size. The door, not his mouthpiece or unplugged version. No one waited behind or outside. I could drink the drums had it not turned his back on us. Times changed its size. The door, not his mouthpiece or unplugged version. The troubadour aged fast, not because of drugs. I could drink the drums had it not turned his back on us. I drew this theory from his Nobel Prize, how he took his time. The troubadour aged fast, not because of drugs. Heartbreak can be lean and acoustic, like a piece of meat, if mood detained the beast. I drew this theory from his Nobel Prize, how he took his time. Every song, a friend and moon to compete for its chi and wives. Heartbreak can be lean and acoustic, like a piece of meat, if mood detained the beast. Sick of the word love, it plagiarized best failure. Every song, a friend and moon to compete for its chi and wives. Unlike a friend, it did not need to try hard. Sick of the word love, it plagiarized best failure. Unlike a moon, it spoke through the graves and diaspora. Unlike a friend, it did not need to try hard. Some gave up despair to find his path. Some gave up even when alive. And like a moon, it spoke through the graves and diaspora, years down the road. If words fell apart, this prophecy would ask for one odd star. Some gave up despair to find his path. Some gave up even when alive. None of his demons survived their trance. None of this passion leveled its height. Years down the road, if words fell apart, this prophecy would ask for one odd star. So what if rain must fall hard, one grumbled. None of his demons survived their trance. None of this passion leveled its height. Instead of Cohen, I heard another bard. And now here's the electric version. Instead of Cohen, I heard another bard. Some thought it thunder, some found him uphill. So what if rain must fall hard, once grumbled. Cut inside each chord, but surrendered for time. I listened to each repetition, an apology in the fewest words. I could have given up a mountain for the storm. How long it could last, it might have sensed. When void of its heaven, it must fight its own earth. I credited the wind for his cri du cœur, discredited the same wind for his rhythm. How much delirium to be heard as a poem, he did not answer, did not bother. To clarify music was not his task. Some thought it ego, some said he'd push notes off the high-speed reel. I saw a door when he played harmonica, green, blue, and ajar. No one waited behind or outside. Times changed its size. The door, not as mouthpiece or unplugged version. I could drink the drums had it not turned his back on us. The troubadour aged fast, not because of drugs. I drew this theory from his Nobel Prize, how he took his time. Heartbreak can be lean and acoustic, like a piece of meat, if mood detained the beast. Every song, a friend and moon to compete for its chi and wives. Sick of the word love, it plagiarized the best failure. And like a friend, it did not need to try hard. And like a moon, it spoke through the graves and diaspora. Some gave up despair to find his path. Some gave up even when alive. Years down the road, if words fell apart, this prophecy would ask for one odd star. None of his demons survived their trance. None of this passion leveled its height. Now the moon is almost hidden. The stars are beginning to hide. The fortune-telling lady has even taken all his things inside, all except for Cain and Abel and the hunchback of Notre Dame. Everybody is making love, or else expecting rain, and the Good Samaritan is dressing, is getting ready for the show. All right, I have not passed out yet. And this is the last poem. The last poem. Eternity. How does one define spirit without blood? To make the body known across the shore, so point blank that we see its passing tail. Once of stone, before a winter moon, the spirit moves from one width to the next height, lighter than the sweet failure of wind and hours and a stranded sail. Spirit, I don't tell myself we control our field, the random phase of a god who leaves us old, an alley to somewhere hypnotic, prolonged and curved at each turn. When you come, you ask the same question I commit to poor speech. How places grieve poised in distance, while the rest of us die trying to live. When you leave, you offer nothing but the reason to fade, that's beyond you to respond to silence. After the cold, when pain outwears pain and quantum physics. I don't tell a soul or to intuit on a peak. I won't tell others how storms heal or stopped the countdown. Why echoes blink to preserve the drift. I won't paint your dream in this portrait. Thank you.
Fiona, bravo, bravo. Thank you so very much, especially for that that tour de force in your homage to Dylan. I think you did the Nobel laureate very proud. That was just a torrent of language and expression and breath. It was really beautiful. Thank you so very much. So typically in a Logos gathering, if we were met around picnic tables at Lazarus Brewing Company, we would, after each poet's reading, invite you to have a little bit of conversation around each poet's reading, and you'd have their final poems from each set written on an order of service in front of you to sort of generate conversation around. And we'd ask you to kind of consider these couple questions as prompts. Which elements in these poems moved you? How did the language help create the emotional experience you had hearing or reading the poem? And what might these poems be inviting you to consider or live into in the context of your own life? But since we found that the breakout room functions don't work so well to facilitate this type of small group conversation, instead we'll have a little bit of curated conversation with the poets. And following our gathering, once the formal program concludes, Fiona and Dan have graciously offered to stay on our Zoom call. So as an extra bonus to those who are joining us here on Zoom, feel free to save any questions, any thoughts, any reflections you'd like to share with the poets, and we'll have a chance to share a little dialogue together once the program concludes. I do, Fiona and Dan, just want to thank you again for this beautiful reading. And I've got to say, in reading both of your beautiful most recent collections, this wonderful aphorism from the first or second rabbi, Ben Bagbag, came to mind, where he talks about Torah, sacred scripture, of saying, turn it and turn it, everything is in it. That there's a text that sort of contains everything. And with both of your collections, I feel like I have that same experience of sort of turning the text in my mind and allowing these varieties of references and images and allusions to sort of reflect and refract in this kaleidoscopic way. And both of you are poets, in my mind, of sort of dizzying, if not daunting, intelligence. And there's so many references in your poems. So I'm just wondering, kind of, how do you think about incorporating different elements of your lived experience, of your experience as a reader and a thinker, into your poems? Or maybe a different way of putting that question is, where do poems come from for you? What sort of sources and genesis do different poems have for each of you?
There's always the dilemma of who speaks first. Fiona, do you want to begin, or would you prefer that I do?
I would let the wiser go first.
Well, I think that's you. It might be Travis asking the question, actually. Well, you know, that's a beautiful thing to think of, that story of the rabbi and the Torah, and this sense of a text that somehow is all containing and containing all at the same time, and that the work of reading in the most proper sense is to understand that the direct experience of it is actually the second time you encounter it, that there's something inside the poems I most admire, and certainly inside the poems I would most want to write, that somehow the return to the poem is always a more originary form of experience, that you actually get closer to a beginning by a form of return. And I suppose to that question of what acts like intelligence in my poems, but I think is something different, actually, you know, of these other texts that are there, these other thoughts, these illusions. It's those that are the things that I am continually turning back to, and in ways that feel almost helpless and unconscious to me. They're texts and poems and ideas of a kind of ongoing present tense that, in some way, to speak of where poems come from for me, that I feel as if I'm writing poems myself only to get towards those other poems, as if it's a kind of work that I have to do, or a labor I have to do, to be granted a kind of permission to get close to the things I want most to be close to.
It's And how about you, Fiona? How do you think of composition, incorporating sources, or if you'd be willing to account for sort of where some of your poems come from?
I think poetry comes from everywhere and anywhere, but obviously poems need to come from somewhere, you see. So I think writing poetry, poems, is a very intimate activity for me. But this being said, I don't think I write poems for myself. I know I have many friends who write poems for themselves, and that's wonderful. For my case, I do write poems to be read, you know, by someone else and whatnot. So in that sense, I'm fairly, I do want the poems to be accessible to some extent, you see. I try not to be as daunting as I could be, even though I'm aware that I can be intimidating, in person, I mean. But you know, how the poem behaves is really independent of me to some extent, because once that's been written and let out, it's up to the other end to work with it, to operate with it. So I would say, you know, poetry is really a mapping of different imaginations. And if you want to ask where does it come from, it comes from somewhere, and obviously everywhere, nowhere. It is to be a little bit philosophical about it. And obviously, you know, if you want to go a little further and go into translation, which is what Dan has been doing and what I did and have been doing, is that it will be a remapping of imagination. So pretty much the planet is still the same, but you're playing with different instruments with different possibilities at different pacings. So that's what I would think of it.
I wonder if, Fiona, you brought up the question of the reader, or the subject of the reader, and I'm wondering, can you, I mean, even sort of hone or sort of more acutely or specifically place like what you're trying to communicate to a reader? Or I mean, is communication even the right word? Or if you're writing for a reader rather than yourself, are you trying to provide that imaginative mapping for someone else, so that they might have it as a lens through which to consider experience in a different way? Or I'm wondering if you could maybe just talk about the relationship with the reader and what your hope for your poems might be as gift to the reader.
Well, you know, I mean, Putin's dog is meant for its dog, and the master, that's for certain, you know. And if the dog can pass down, I mean, why not? And if it does something to the master, even better. But so I do have that specific subject object for certain poems, and I think that works much better for poems with strong, even subtle political undertones. It doesn't need to undercut the aesthetics or the poetics or whatever linguistic functionings that may exist within the poem, but it can work in tandem, I think. Perhaps Dan can talk a little bit about that, because Dan has a very strong voice in each poem, and that voice can be fairly internal, I mean inner, as far as I interpret it. So
yeah, first I just want to say how much I love that mapping of multiple imaginations as one of the works a poem can do. That feels deeply right to me. And you know, as I think as right as Travis is in describing your poems, Fiona, as mindful, it also makes me understand how full of minds the poems are, and that's a real gift of them. You know, and I think in a curious kind of way, yeah, I know at one level I don't exactly think about a reader, even as I understand that a poem in its kind of deepest phenomenal existence presupposes the existence of another. You know, like it just in some ways I feel like a poem can't be written for oneself in a certain sense. It requires the possibility of a you who has at some unforeseeable point in the future the chance to pick it up and have the poem as a grounds of primary encounter in some way. And I guess what I mostly think about these days is that the poems feel to me a way to participate in a kind of ongoing experience of thinking, care, feeling, that in some ways are kind of continuous through human experience. And the poems are written as a form of asking how one can participate in that. And if the poems are doing their work, and you know, as to be frank, I am myself never sure if they're doing this work. But the poems then offer themselves to a reader as a means of that participation, and invite the reader into that kind of co-creative work of reading, which feels as fundamentally filled with necessary work of imagination as the writing of the poems do. And I hear that much in kind of Fiona's hope for the reader's experience too.
So, I mean, I do see the movement of thought in a very intriguing and compelling way in both of your bodies of work. And I'm wondering, I mean, how kind of ruminative or contemplative, or like, I guess, cogitative elements of sort of the mind, like how they get embodied in form. Like, I'm wondering about the relationship between thought and thinking and form in your poems, if that's not too abstract.
You know,
Ooh, that's a question for Dan.
Well done.
I'm gonna say that for you. You know, I think it really depends on the poem and what the poem is concerned with in some way. That I want to think that a poem has to discover the kind of its deepest formal logic by a kind of it's a weird way to put it, I fear, but you know, when Wallace Stevens says something like description is revelation, that in a way that it's something revealed, you know, revealed to the poem that's working towards a kind of description of what it's about. And that can change. Like the kind of chapbook I wrote, Variations on Dawn and Dusk, was this nonce form where the first word of the first line and the last word of the last line rhyme. And so the last word of the first line and the first word of the last line to create this kind of tense chiasmus of rhyme. And the number of syllables in the first line was the number of lines throughout. So 6 syllables, 6 lines. And it was done because the poem was about these squares of light falling through Robert Irwin's, you know, Dawn to Dusk in Marfa, Texas. And it was as if like the form there was finding a way to hold open in an almost physical kind of way the space that I wanted to think towards, that was that ground of participation. So for me, it can range everything from that kind of creation of a form that whose strictures I have to learn how to obey in order to write it, to something far more organic, and I simply can't tell what it's going to be until I get towards the writing. So, you know, in Eros, there's a poem called Theseus's Ship, which reenacts that exact philosophical dilemma by reusing every word and having to create a new poem only out of what's already been written. So there's different ways it happens.
I have never deliberately approached a poem as a form of thought. In all honesty, I'm always more concerned about how a poem behaves and can behave, and then through the behavioral characteristics, I look for the inner landscape of which thought can be the key, you know, which thought can be a form. But I would always not try to make it such as an insular world of thought, you know, something that thinking generates thought itself and thought generates the thinking itself. I tend to avoid that. This is not to say that I don't like those poems, quite the contrary. Many of my favorite poets write poems, you know, they're exactly like that. But I suppose after a while, you know, we start to realize what we can do and can't do. And sometimes there might be just 4 lines in one poem that contain a specific thought and can function independently of the rest of the poem as a thought in itself. And that's very good. You know, then that's for me like a cream of the cream. You know, I'll be very happy. I would say that I tackle very much the poem from word to word rather than the ambition of it, right from the start. And you know, and at some point something might happen, and I see something else and I follow it. But I generally would base it on a thread of reality, very, very concrete. Without that, it's just air, you know, and it sounds great, it's aesthetic, and I can admire that sort of work when well done, but I can't find myself, you know, sitting down and doing that. I'll be like, what am I doing, you know? I'd rather read that sort of, because many other writers have done much better than I would have done, you see? So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and it raises more for me. But I'm also mindful of the fact that we're getting close to the finish of our program, and I want to be mindful for folks' time. So I did want to ask you one more question, which feels like it's too important not to ask. I see the thematically, perhaps not directly addressed necessarily, Fiona, in your book so much as in Arrows, Dan, but I do see the kind of questions of prayer, of contemplation, of mindfulness, in whatever kind of variety of religious experience sort of being engaged at some level. And I'm wondering, do you see any kind of analogs between the ways that poems work or work in us and prayer? Or do you see, I don't know, any sort of like kind of reciprocity between them, any sort of resonance between prayer and poetry?
I can't imagine any human being on this world who has never ever prayed once, or even for like 2 seconds. I just can't imagine that. You know, and the person can be atheist at some point or whatnot, but certainly the experience of a prayer must at some point happened in one's life. I mean, I would have hoped so. So in that sense, what does a prayer means for me is really to go towards something that's luminous, you know, something that might clarify or bring light. And in that vein, to me, a poem is really very much a search or a pursuit of beauty. So that's very clear to me that there's something to share. I wouldn't say that every poem is a prayer. You know, every poem can be an anti-prayer too, in a way. But still, there's something. There's still the space that's inside. That's a distance with the rest. That's totally interactive and independent of its own, and that attracts me a lot. I think that's very generative.
Yeah. How about you, Dan?
And this is oddly something more and more on my mind over the last few years. And one of the commonalities is it feels to me that prayer is a particular act of language that's always seeking relation in some way, desiring relation, and that poems act in this way too, in a variety of different ways. And it's been on my mind, you know, like this work of translation, and Fiona's, you know, far more expert at this than I am. I'm still really a novice at it, but you come to these words and connections and homonyms that make spurious connections that I want to heap all the faith I can in. And one of those happened the other day. So in Greek, you'll find a word that would be spelled A-R-A, ara. And usually you don't translate it. It's there to mark a question, like a question is being asked, and often a question that is being asked out of a kind of anxiety in a way. And then the very same letters with a different accent, not ara, but ara, would mean prayer. And the verb then is eromai, araomai, which would be to pray. And it did like that just as like, again, kind of dovetailed in my mind in a certain way that that what it is that's prayerful in the poems, is that they're getting after a way of asking a question. They put into question and put themselves into question continually, and that has felt really kind of eye-opening to me, even as its grammatical rectitude is probably faulty.
I love that, though, putting some faith in the false cognates or wanting to tease out those resonances. That's amazing. Gosh, Dan, Fiona, I would love to just continue this conversation with y'all for hours, and we'll have a chance to pose some more questions to you both, and to maybe have a little bit more reflection in just a couple minutes after the formal conclusion to our programming. But I want to thank you both again for your absolutely gorgeous readings, and to just take a moment to share with folks on our Zoom call and or tuning in on Facebook Live, just to give folks a sense of how to support our poets and what's upcoming at Logos. In just a moment, I'll stop the screen share and drop some links in your chat windows, which will allow you a chance to purchase Dan's and Fiona's books. We're partnering this week, as always, with Bookwoman, Austin's premier feminist bookstore, and so there'll be a link to their bookshop page. And so every wonderful copy of Rain and Plural and Arrows and Dan's and Stone Garland and Dan's and Fiona's other books that you purchase will go to benefit a wonderful Austin-based independent bookstore. And so, friends, I'm just going to say, go ahead and stock up on your holiday shopping now. This is such a great time to support our artists who imbue such hope and joy and meaning into our everyday lives. So I really invite you to be generous if you're able, and to support the wonderful work that Dan and Fiona are doing and have blessed us with today. We do have another wonderful series of digital gatherings that have been scheduled for this spring. So on the 19th of January, Tyree Day and Hannah Vanderhart, who I believe is on this call, will be reading here in the Logos Ether. John Mario and Nicole Seeley will be with us in February, and Christopher Kempf is also on this call, and Srikanth Reddy will be with us in March. So a wonderful winter series coming up, and we're honored as always to be presenting these digital gatherings with Eco-Theo Review, who's committed to enlivening conversations and commitments around ecology, spirituality, and art. And we'll drop a link to Eco-Theo's subscription page as well. I really commend it to you. They have amazing printed quarterly, a quarterly circulation of printed journals, and a digital presence as well. So please go on Eco-Theo's website and check out their new social justice section as well. Speaking of which, this month we launched a very exciting collaboration with Cave Canem, who's been a home for Black poetry for the last 25 years. And Logos and Eco-Theo are going to be collaborating with Cave Canem to establish a fellowship for 4 emerging Black poets. And so each of our 4 poets who were selected by our guest judge, our inaugural judge this year is Gregory Pardlow, and each of those 4 prize winners will receive a $1,000 honorarium, publication in a designated summer issue of Eco-Theo Review, and we'll also have a chance to do a Logos gathering with Greg Pardlow, the featured poet. So if you or anyone you know would be a good candidate for this fellowship, there's information on how to submit on the Cave Canem or Logos websites. So again, friends, thank you. One last note. We do also at Logos curate a number of what we call creativity cadres. So these are small groups of 7 to 10 individuals who gather fairly regularly, twice a month typically, to either read poetry together, to workshop their own poems, or to learn more about the craft of composing poems. So if you're interested in a small group community and connecting with some like-hearted and like-souled poets, just reach out to me or sign up through the Logos website, and we'd love to connect you with the creativity cadre. And I couldn't resist at the end of this very hard, this weird, bewildering 2020 to just throw up a couple pics of our beloved gatherings at Lazarus Brewing Company. We know we won't be gathering in person in the near future. We're going to continue to conduct our programming in as safe but also life-giving way as possible. But we do long to be reconnected with you all in person. And Fiona and Dan, it would be an absolute dream to get you both to Austin at some point to raise a glass of some of a lovely Lazarus libation and enjoy some love and tacos with you both in person. So thank you so very much again for blessing us with your poetry and presence. And just as we began this gathering, we'll conclude it with a responsive reading of another poem, which will serve as our benediction. And this will be Psalm by George Oppen. So I am just going to ding the meditation bell. And again, if you're reading this on Facebook Live or on our Zoom call, even with your microphones muted, we invite you to read those bolded lines aloud to add your voice to that of this collective.
Psalm. Veritas sequitur.
In the small beauty of the forest, the wild deer bedding down, that they are there.
Their eyes, effortless, the soft lips nuzzle and the alien small teeth tear at the grass.
The roots of it dangle from the mouth, scattering earth in the strange roots. They who are there.
Their paths nibbled through the fields, the leaves that shade them hang in the distances of sun.
The small nouns crying faith in this in which the wild deer started and stared out.
Dan, Fiona, thank you so much again for being with us this evening. And thank you all for joining us for this final gathering of 2020. We hope that you and your loved ones remain safe, healthy, and grounded in the midst of all this year's upheaval. And we look forward to seeing you again for our gatherings in the new year. Thanks, y'all. Go in peace, and we look forward to seeing you soon.